Good evening and welcome to the second in our series of Artists' Conversations. This is part of a research project that myself and Dr. Luca Csepely-Knorr are working on, attached to a big project about landscape decision making that's being run by the University of Leicester. We're really interested in the landscapes of post-war infrastructure. And this event is really a reconfigured second meeting of our research network, which was originally supposed to be, I guess, kind of behind closed doors. We've changed things around to make this a much more public forum. And I'm absolutely thrilled that Helen Angell and Kevin Crooks agreed to be part of this series. We're going to be running for about an hour this evening, and Luca will be the compère. If you look to the bottom of your screen, you should be able to find a Q&A button. If you have questions, I'd really encourage you to type those questions into the Q&A box as we proceed, and I'll be kind of chairing the Q&A at the conclusion of the conversation. The chat is also open, so please, if you wish to share views or opinions with the rest of the audience, then feel free to utilize that function as well. But as I say, if you have any specific questions, if you can direct them into the Q&A, that would be absolutely fantastic. I've no desire to continue talking for any longer than I ought to, so I'll pass you over to Luca. I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Richard. I'm very, very pleased to introduce our two artists tonight. Helen is a poetry and non-fiction writer who's based in South Yorkshire. She has worked creatively with the National Railway Museum, the Hepworth and Kelham Island Museum, as well as in collaboration with visual artists. Her poetry has appeared in Atrium, Strix, Blue Nip, the Cotton Grass Appreciation Anthology, and the Modernist. She's currently working on a collection, Everything Here is Bliss, inspired by brutalist architecture and urban infrastructure in the north of England. She's going to be in conversation tonight with Kevin, who is head of photography at Carmer College. Kevin is a St. Balanced Hayes-based photographic artist and a Deutsche Bank award recipient. Kevin's work currently explores the effects of how governmental policy, initiatives and programs shape the lives of people within society. Welcome to you both. I'm really pleased to have you here. Thank you to agree to join us tonight. And I think if, as a start, would you like to introduce your work prior this project and why you were interested in joining us?
So I'll go first, if that's okay, Luca. So thank you very much, and really appreciate the opportunity to be able to do this. So I was obviously invited by yourself and Richard just to be part of the conversations, and part of one of the reasons why I was interested, it was about kind of looking at kind of obviously landscapes within of infrastructure, and kind of thinking about, and for me especially, kind of just revisiting that, because it's something obviously I've explored in my previous work. I'd worked with Richard and contributed to edition of The Modernist. So that enabled me to kind of revisit a project that I'd previously produced around the M62 motorway, predominantly a landscape, quite traditional type landscape photography project. But you'd made it quite clear that you wanted to kind of work with artists and involve a literary artist as well, which was something that I'd kind of touched, I kind of had some experience of before, but not to any certain kind of significance really, and it was really just kind of like touching upon in terms of kind of contributing to the presentation of my work. So that was really struck me, and I was really excited by the prospect. So the M62 project that was contained within the infrastructure edition of The Modernist was initially something that I started as part of an MA that I completed in 2016. And then as a result of producing that work, I then went on to gain funding through the Deutsche Bank, and then extended that project further. And the project initially started at looking at the Pennine section of the motorway, really just kind of, I'd always been quite captivated by the scale of the landscape within that particular section, and how the motorway intersects the landscape, and how the landscape is opened up because of the inclusion of the motorway, how that accessibility kind of is available. And as somebody who kind of grew up in a small town, that kind of idea that it connected other kind of towns within that kind of belt across the north was always something that I was aware of. So it kind of made me look at it in many different kind of ways. So the initial thing was to take photographs of the landscape, but also then I started to gain an appreciation of how that landscape had been manufactured, the complexities of the construction of the motorway, the social impact, the way in which it facilitated the infrastructure that was kind of building up around that particular time. So there was a historical content to the work as well. And also the kind of social and economic impact as well was something that I started to touch upon. And then when I started to look at doing work in relation to the modernist, it started to give me a fresher understanding and appreciation of the design and the architecture, which was something I'd already touched upon. But again, it kind of enabled me to kind of look at that in more depth and detail. So then obviously leading on to this, it was an opportunity to kind of revisit that and start to think about, okay, well, look at infrastructure in a new and kind of fresh way, and start to work with somebody who has dealt with that particular subject matter before. But yeah, it gave me another kind of a fresh understanding of that, and how to kind of a fresh appreciation of what that could do in terms of developing my practice. So yeah.
Thank you. Helen?
Yeah, and for me, it was really important for me to put together lyric poetry with very kind of industrial landscapes, and I felt quite amused by that kind of juxtaposition of the two, actually, that I wanted to honour these very working class industrial landscapes, not with rough language, but with very smooth poetic language. I felt that they deserved to be brought back together with each other. And I was in Leeds, where I'd been living for quite a while when I started this off. But I was pining for South Yorkshire, and I actually began a small project just by myself, where I'd intended to walk and discover all the bridges down the M1 and stop at each one and write a poem about it. But of course that didn't get very far, because that's much more hazardous than I'd anticipated. So I didn't get very far at all. And then it wasn't long before I actually did get back to South Yorkshire, and what I started doing there, I'd got an old A to Z from kind of like 1995, and I tried to rediscover my area by initially trying to walk the boundary of S65, which was the area that I'd been born and brought up in. But again, that started to get a little bit hazardous as well, and I didn't complete that one either, because I was kind of by myself. And then it kind of fell into place when a structure fell into place where I devised a set of 60 poems. I still have 12 to do, but lockdowns kind of kept me from traveling. Essentially with two strands, with a focus. One strand is brutalist, quite iconic pieces of infrastructure, all the way up from kind of the Pavilion in Peterlee to Tinsley Viaduct, to much more kind of localized infrastructure to do with kind of bypasses and the things that are very immediate in my kind of life. So you know, and I stuck with the A to Z, and what ended up coming out of that, particularly during lockdown, was I just took my house as the starting point, and to walk every street on a page of the A to Z, that I did do during the first lockdown. And of course, because it's 25 years old, some things were there. Some things that were there weren't there in the 25 years ago, and some things that are in the A to Z just weren't there. So that gave me a whole new opportunity to rediscover, you know, my landscape, and to try and celebrate the beauty in everything, to try and treat it, to try and really celebrate everything that was there, maybe that didn't get noticed, I think, and to sit and write about it. In traditionally unpoetic places, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you. So when we asked you to collaborate with each other, we were very pleased to hear that you really started to get into conversation. So could you just tell us about the start of your collaboration and conversations?
Yeah, so for me, it was, like I say, it was a really exciting opportunity and prospect to do something new, and but also quite challenging as well. Like, you know, something that I'd kind of not really kind of explored for a while. These particular themes, and obviously working with somebody like Helen was kind of an additional kind of thing to it, where I was thinking, oh, this could be really interesting to see how this kind of develops and what she brings with it, and kind of bouncing off ideas. And so I was really excited by that prospect, just a proper kind of collaboration. And at that initial stage, I wasn't too sure how that would kind of pan out, but obviously, and then speaking to Helen, especially within the initial conversation that we had, I was really encouraged to see how that would kind of unfold. I know we kind of mentioned this throughout, but that kind of threat of not being able to come in contact, kind of have that kind of physical interaction, you know, and meeting with each other, for me didn't seem to be a kind of barrier for us to make progress with it. It seemed something that we could, you know, quite easily kind of work through. And Helen mentioned her interest with pylons and structures and electricity. So that started getting me thinking about, okay, well, in terms of, because I think as a photographer, there's always a question of accessibility, and there's always that opportunity to gain access to places. So I started straight away thinking, okay, well, and again, thinking about my local area, about how these structures and how these buildings to do with the infrastructure of electricity and how it's distributed. And just kind of like 15 minutes down the road, there's a big power station which is just being decommissioned. So it got me kind of thinking about potentially how I could start to explore that within the work. And thinking back to the kind of M62 as well, and but that kind of sense of connectivity was something that was really interesting. The significance of that, the phasing out of forms of infrastructure, how infrastructure is continuing to change, and the need for infrastructure, and that was something I touched again on the M62 project. You know, the requirement for road networks, and especially in the respect of what's going on now with remote connectivity and you know, the use of in the internet for most things, especially obviously at the moment. And then photographing the sites kind of just allowed me to kind of appreciate the production and the distribution, and thinking about how that's going to change, and you know, how people are going to consume electricity, and how it's going to be produced, and how it's going to be distributed. So that was the kind of initial kind of conversations, you know, that were kind of, and thoughts that were going through my mind at that stage.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was such a brilliant opportunity. I mean, I love working with visual artists, photographers and painters and filmmakers. I love the way they look at the world, and I always really appreciate that kind of interaction. So I'd obviously really admired Kevin's photographs. So I was really chuffed that I got this chance to work with him and to settle on a theme that neither of us had really looked at closely recently. Was a really nice opportunity that we knew that we could get to those locations irrespective of that geographical distance, and try and find the similarities. There'd be enough similarities between those locations, or even whatever the differences were between those locations as well. So, that we kept in really tight contact with each other once we'd made that decision. So, Evan, could we put that first image up, please? So once we decided what the theme was, my usual route is just to kind of read all about it. And Luca had sent me some academic papers, and this one actually came from it was lovely Juliana Kai, who had seen at the conference, and she sent me a paper by James Purden all about artists in the 1930s, and this was the first image that was kind of in that piece of work. And just to read about how artists in the 20s and 30s and 40s were capturing just what we were going out to capture was something that I'd never really read before. So once I'd done this, then I went out on we kind of went out on our first initial walk. Evan, can you put the next photograph up? So on my very first walk out, I found this, which was just almost exactly the same as that first painting. And I had been reading all about how the initial artists had been trying to capture what they felt was the future. And because these structures were practically the same, it felt like I wasn't really capturing the future anymore, but in a sense capturing the past, that these things would be changing and may not be with us forever. So that was the kind of big difference between what I'd been reading and what I was finding when I got out there, really. Kevin, can I pass that over to you?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, and again, just to kind of highlight that, there was this kind of continued conversation. So Helen showed me those images and explained her kind of thoughts and feelings about those, and that then kind of gave me a direction in which to kind of pursue. As I've kind of mentioned before, I was quite interested in kind of staying within the local area and thinking, especially in terms of the restrictions. So that was kind of almost, and as a photographer, again, I quite like kind of working with constraints. I think I find it quite useful. I find if you've got a particular kind of constraint in mind in terms of the location, it's somewhat easier to kind of focus your attention and your studies within that. But obviously access was a consideration. So finding particular locations, thinking about the images that Helen had showed me, then thinking about places that were close by to kind of go to and start to kind of exploit in terms of the visual aspects of it. So like I mentioned, the Fiddler's Ferry is just about 15 minutes down the road. So I kind of had that in mind, but there's a closer kind of substation that's really close, about kind of 5 minutes from where I live. So I went, that was the first kind of site visit, as it were. So Evan, if you'd just like to bring up, I think it's pictures 3, 4, and 5. So like I said, the big kind of quite a dominant kind of structure, this substation. So I kind of started to kind of just walk around this space and consider the visual aspects of it. And obviously in consideration of what kind of Helen had spoken about as well. So for me, it was very much, I'm not really sure as to kind of what to kind of extract from this in a visual sense. But the kind of first, the structural aspects of it, you get a sense of kind of tension and kind of, you can feel the vibrations and you can hear the hum, and so these kinds of kind of, really defined kind of structural kind of patterns, and something that you can exploit as a photographer in terms of the tonal differences of the structures. There's a real definition within what you see. And obviously I was taking kind of inspiration from Helen's writing and starting to make an informed decision about what I was going to do. That's another one from that initial visit. You know, the formal aspects of the structures, considering the design and the detail and how they're kind of placed within a landscape. You know, and also considering the kind of natural aspects of the landscape as well. I mean, where that is, it's a kind of industrial estate, but there are agricultural aspects to the landscape as well. But yeah, that texture, kind of detail, all these kind of formal things that you would consider as a photographer, and you would start to utilize, started to become really prominent. You know, tone and light. This was one that was the one that's on the screen now, something that Helen picked up on. Started to think about the kind of the light that's reflected from these structures. And for me, and again, you know, you're often kind of finding opportunities to utilize light and how that can be demonstrated within the image, and how you can actually utilize the light to accentuate certain features. You know, the contrast between the kind of light and the dark. So all these things were something that started to kind of really inspire me and started to kind of shape how I move forward with it. So yeah.
Yeah, if we can stay on that one, Evan. Yeah, this was the first photograph. I think you sent me about 6 through, and this was the one. There was kind of 3 of these with these white pylons, and these were the ones that connected with a piece of reading that Luca had sent me about camouflaging pylons. I was like, oh, there's a white pylon. And so what that then sent me down the whole route of kind of binary opposites really with these. So I was thinking of kind of black and white. I was thinking of negative, positive, because I'd still got the electricity thing in my head. Kind of male, female, past, future that was already with me. And then I'd started thinking very much about, you know, we were just after kind of Christmas time. We knew that kind of strange Christmas was upon us, and full lockdown was probably going to come after Christmas. And so I was thinking a lot about freedom and restriction, about how these pylons are alone and yet together. And then also, because it was kind of Christmas time, I was also thinking a lot about kind of relationships, which seem to be pretty key in connection with lockdown and Christmas. And then really the kind of more metaphorical images tied in with these, particularly with this one as a trigger really. But I think the process, when you're writing, it's a very kind of isolated experience, and really I don't let anyone read anything until it's as finished as I think I can get it. And so to actually be sending someone pieces of writing that you know aren't finished, and you're like, oh, but I have to. Kevin sharing his photographs, I absolutely have to send him a bit of writing. And I think I just kind of sent like six lines or something, and you add a key image, and that was probably going to stick with. So that at least he got something then, so that he could see a little bit about what I was thinking and what I was looking at when I was going out into these landscapes as well. But you know, the pressure of knowing that I was going to write something and wanted to write something, with having to send bits and with this whole kind of electric kind of environment, you really did feel the kind of physical tension of it. It was really exciting, but I was relieved once I'd actually got something down that I knew that I was going to stick with, because I'd ended up with about 5 different potential poem routes, and then it was this image that kind of consolidated it for me, that I knew that would be what I would write about once I got this one really. And then it was from that I'd been out on a Christmas walk with my sister and my mum around a reservoir in Chesterfield that has like pylons, just kind of, you can walk up to them. They're just in the middle of this landscape. So I was able to get some really close detail then of the pylon itself, and it was these images that were then inspired by the glass beads that dripped that I'd found on these. I loved the jeweled aspect of them. So this is Kevin's response to some words. So Kevin, I'll pass back to you for this one.
Yeah, so like Helen says, it's that, making clear that kind of two-way kind of process between, me kind of being inspired by what each of us were saying in terms of the conversations that were going on. But this kind of, and again, as a photographer, you're kind of looking for details and the aesthetic qualities of that are contained within a landscape, and so this was kind of. And I think this illustrates the exposed kind of nature of things as well. I was kind of going around a substation and I was thinking, oh, it's kind of locked down and all this kind of craziness in terms of, questioning why people are out and about at the moment. And I'm kind of walking around a substation photographing, through kind of railings and things. But so there was that kind of increased kind of sense of tension, and because of that situation, and but again, you kind of, you narrow your field of view and you start to kind of extract details out and start to consider things, and give things more appreciation and elevate the significance of them, and the structural significance of them, and the beauty of them in terms of, they started to kind of encouraged to produce some quite abstract images like the one on the screen, and starts to see those things in isolation, and again, like I say, it starts to increase the significance of them, and and again, this kind of relationship between power and electricity, and the forces that are contained within them.
I mean, this one's amazing. It's like an insect. It just got they got so abstract. I just thought, I mean, significantly better than you can imagine than my just snapshots that I'd sent Kevin. I've seen this. So yeah, they're absolutely beautiful. Kevin, do you want to talk any more about these two glass bead ones?
No, I think I've mentioned everything. Like I say, for me, it's that kind of, they started to become, and I found this as well. And people sometimes will say, "Oh, why are you taking pictures of motorways?" Or why are you taking pictures of what would consider to be not particularly aesthetically pleasing? But like everything, there's ways in which that can be illustrated, and I think that was something that at that point that I started to kind of recognize and started to kind of exploit more, and so yeah, but yeah.
Yeah. So shall I read the poem that goes with this, because that would seem like a good time. So this poem is called Negative Positive. In the New Year's Eve sun, I glint, a silver wedding trinket, mini Eiffel Tower. Glass beads draping my razored collarbone, ice rings to insulate my Parisian neckline. From my shoulders, black laces stretch to the limits of thinness, connect to yours, where you stand, hands on hips, Clint Eastwood bandolier slung across your lean body, hat tipped over one eye. At all hours you pulse messages, silent, electrifying, never moving, twitching the leather reins. Tethered and tentered, I am bothered by small birds that flap around my face, and others behind, who watch standing on each other's shoulders, 3 high like cross-gartered acrobats. I try to lose myself in the haze, be the colour of distance. Maybe in the night I will run, but I know that if I move, you will too. That was that one. And then there is a second poem in process that actually goes with, Evan, can you move to this one? That actually goes with this one, that connects also with the earlier one with the 3, which I'd really liked. That first image of the 3 very struck me as being kind of very militaristic and quite intimidating. But I hadn't, yeah, that's the one. But I just hadn't got the poem together for that one at all. And kind of in the last couple of weeks, the poem for this and that final one have come together. I was saying to Kevin, it's really dark. I was trying to write about the power of electricity, and I wanted to write about possibilities and the power of electricity that we've got within us, and it would be really positive, but it's ended up really dark, like that artist off the Fast Show is always painting in black. So I'm still, that one's still a work in progress, but yeah, for me, this one sent me then down to a massive substation right by the M1 that feeds all of Sheffield, and these have got a very different feel to the pylons, haven't they, Kevin? When you're near them, it's just a different thing.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, the differences in the structure are quite profound, really, and the way in which you kind of see them, and the way in which you kind of look to record them is very different. Yeah.
I mean, there's something very strangely accessible and very elegant about those pylons, partly the way they're situated and you can get right up to them, but these are so, the security around them is so tight, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, I've got another one that's much smaller, but even that how conspicuous you feel when you're there doing something, photographing or writing about it, gives the whole creative process a real kind of
yeah, it does, and I found that from a lot of things I've done before, and that was the same with the M62 ones. You you feel somewhat like an imposter kind of within those spaces. You feel the level of exposure, and it's something that doesn't really kind of go, doesn't really kind of leave you as well. It has quite an impact on you and how you kind of have to focus your attention as well. Which sounds quite strange, but
yes, I think that's kind of everything about these images, isn't it? I don't know if you want to move on to where we're going kind of next with things, Luca.
Yes, if you could just
Kevin,
about plans.
Do you want to do yours where you're going next?
Yeah, of course. So it certainly encouraged me to seriously think about the development of my own practice, and I mentioned that to Helen the other day. It's really started to kind of open up the prospect of doing more around this particular subject matter. It was always something that I kind of wanted to revisit anyway, but I want to start to consider a kind of a bigger body of work. But this has enabled me to think more about the differences between infrastructure and the impact that has, and also, like Helen's mentioned, and it was mainly Helen who kind of brought this to my attention about how this is going to kind of almost disappear, and it was kind of a lot of this was set up to be really kind of futuristic and kind of forward thinking and modern, and whereas now there's the need for and the necessity of these things is becoming put into question. That sense of connectivity was also something that really kind of came to my attention through doing it. The idea of them being man-made, but they sit in these kind of these natural landscapes, and although a lot of them are kind of manipulated now, they're real dominant features, but they're not necessarily disruptive. They can sit quite sympathetically within the landscape. They can enhance the landscape, and in terms of you know, in a photographic sense, they can kind of punctuate the visual aspects of a landscape, and they enable you to create a greater sense of scale and depth, and they can enable you to create particular focal points. And that was, again, something I've found through the experience of doing this, of you know, you can look at these structures as really dominating and really kind of obscure, and really they're not sympathetic to the landscape in which they sit. But a lot of my, you know, a lot of things that I was kind of looking at, especially through the motorway stuff, was there is a consideration as to how these sit within the landscape, and in a way it's kind of increased the accessibility to the landscape as a result of these structures being there. Obviously working with Helen was a really enriching experience, and it's definitely something I would look to continue doing. You know, it's definitely something that's kind of been an inspiration for me, and working with the writer now through doing this experience has kind of, you know, it made me kind of want to do it more and pursue it more, and pursue the opportunities that brings to the development of my practice. So yeah, so that's kind of generally where I'm up to, but it has been really exciting and really engaging, and something very good for you to do through this particular period of time at the moment, because you feel like, oh, there's nothing that's going to happen in terms of mid-practice at the moment. But you know, it's been quite surprised to see how much I've gained through doing it.
Yeah, it's been just a brilliant opportunity. I mean, thanks to everyone who, you know, gave us this chance. It's been great, and it quite like that. There's something about it being winter as well, and the conditions of going to do that particular theme have been really, really good. So I think we've still got some mileage to go with this project, and things to finish off, and there'll be more writing to come from this. Yeah, I think, yeah, as well as this, I've also got the 12 poems to finish for Everything Is Bliss, when we can actually get out to places. And I'm working with Mandy Payne as well, on very similar kind of locations, much more kind of concrete locations than infrastructure ones with her. And again, I really enjoy being out with someone who looks at things very, very differently. Yeah, and also it's probably a really nice time to mention the telephone exchange, little bit of fun that we'd been having on Instagram. And, you know, we just as an opportunity to try and pull people together, particularly during lockdown, I think. Myself and Simon J. Hadfield and lovely Lisa Brown, Lisa in Leeds on Instagram, had set up hashtag switchboard exchange, just to, you know, just have a bit of fun really. But we would really, really love to hear from people who are out and about photographing their telephone exchanges. And it just so happens that it coincided as well with Richard's PhD opportunity. So yeah, we'd really, really welcome people sending their pictures in for that.
Thanks very much, Helen. We can perhaps touch on that slightly later. Really interesting to hear you both kind of talk about how you've brought your practices together, and how you've sort of seized this opportunity. And it's nice to have the whole conversation kind of around the work that you've been making together. There's a few questions come in, so I'll start with one from Avni. Question in brackets, or observation for Kevin. I noticed most of your other photographs are in colour, because I shared a link to your website during the talk. But the M62 is photographed and videoed in black and white, almost as if these photographs feel as if they're older or frozen in time, and at the same time very textural, like you want to run your fingers across them. The beautiful photographs in the black and white bring some quality out that maybe colour would lose. I guess the question is, why or how was the choice made to photograph them in black and white?
Okay, so yeah, so it's always a consideration, and I think the choice of black and white is really just to kind of accentuate the structural qualities of that are contained within the buildings and the structures themselves. That increased level of contrast, it provides you, I feel, with an opportunity to create more of a distinction between the kind of light and dark areas. So there's a kind of the formal kind of aspects that allows you to kind of enhance. I've often found with this type of work, when you start to work with colour, the colours within the landscape itself become quite dominant and start to almost kind of the dominance of the structures becomes kind of somewhat lost between the intensity of the colours that surround it. So yeah, so it's kind of like almost kind of an ongoing kind of balancing act, you know, and I've not tried to, through the editing of them, I've not tried to kind of really kind of elevate the dominance of one thing or another. You know, I want to kind of create this kind of harmonious kind of balance between the two aspects of both. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And this is a question from Alexander to both of you. Helen, Kevin, have you shared your work with engineers that work on this sort of infrastructure, or might that take some of the magic or beauty out of it for you?
You know, no, I'm pretty kind of, I'm just fascinated by engineering, even though I have absolutely no, you know, kind of talents in that area at all. You know, I have family members who are, you know, quite talented engineers. So, and, you know, kind of, you know, my family were steel workers, so I've been surrounded by people who are very kind of good. I'm kind of the odd one out, really, but yeah, I love the technical language. You know, Brian was talking about this on Tuesday, but that's why I usually do the reading first, because there are usually words in there that you just absolutely have to use, because the technical language itself has a poetry of its own, and those big feats of engineering actually come out of people actually capable of doing that. I just find, you know, tremendous, really.
Kevin, have you shared your work with engineers?
No, I've not. I think the closest I got was I spoke to from the M62 project. I spoke to a few engineers who worked on it, and a lot of it I was taken by the kind of enormity of the project and how difficult the creation of these massive infrastructure projects are. You know, the kind of levels that they went to the personal cost, and yeah, just like I said, the kind of enormity of it. So that was as close as I got. Yeah, it was a kind of it was somebody, yeah, who directly worked on it, who spoke to me about it. But that's been heavily documented in the past as well.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I'm endlessly drawn to the Tinsley Viaduct. It never fails to excite me when I get to drive over Tinsley Viaduct.
I agree with you there, Helen. More so when the cooling towers were there.
Yeah.
You were underneath the M1 and you felt like you could touch them.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a question here from Brian. Do you think that this infrastructure, pylons and motorways, opens up space, both visually and as a part of walking practice, or does it close it down? Kevin?
I don't think so. I think a lot of it is through me kind of looking. I don't ever feel like when I look into something that things kind of close in. I think the more you look into it, the more opportunities you get to find, to capture and to work and to produce work, sorry, in response to, and to highlight, and to like I was saying before, you know, often with this type of work that I've been involved in, a lot of it is about kind of elevating the significance of that and celebrating the impact that all of this material has on people. So it's almost like showing the unknown and you know, bringing the importance to that, and say elevating the significance of it to people.
Helen?
Yeah, I mean, I think the places that we both explore are often places that can be a bit inaccessible anyway. And the frustration, I'm sure Kevin's more than mine, of trying to take a photograph through a railing. For me, trying to find somewhere to sit, to write some notes. But we're usually in places that are off the beaten track anyway, and are not traditional places to walk, I would say. Yeah, so I don't look at it in those terms anyway. I'm always just like Kevin, just trying to find the beauty in what is there. If you just look at it closely enough, you see so many people put so many wonderful details of things that they found on Instagram when they're out urban walking, and it's just there, you know, it's just all around us. And this strikes me as a really perfect time to rediscover, you know, where you're at, or to almost as a kind of tourist, just to stay in that very small localized area.
Yeah.
That make the most of what you've got there, I think.
Examine it sort of with new eyes almost.
Yeah.
Completely agree.
There's a couple of questions, one that I'd composed and another one from David, that sort of play a little bit into the kind of historic narrative, and I'll state them both together, and perhaps you can respond to those. So my question was, have we come to accept or even be nostalgic for these objects and landscapes of infrastructure? And David's question was, do you feel that a long period of time is required for these imposing structures to become part of the landscape? For example, do recent wind farm developments resonate to the same extent as older or decades old infrastructure?
I think the wind farms do. I mean, I love the wind farms. But again, I guess people reacted to them in the same way that they did the pylons originally, that they're a blot on the landscape. But the massive wind farm that Brian was talking about, as you go out towards Lincolnshire, is just breathtaking, you know.
I think a lot of the work that I did, you know, I've done in the past in terms of the creation of pictures about this kind of idea of the picturesque, and you know, no kind of landscape being completely natural, and every landscape being manufactured in some way. And I think you know, through doing the power station images that I did as part of this, got me thinking about, once these things become decommissioned and they're gone forever, and you know, all that remains are the photographic images of those structures themselves. But that again kind of forced me to think about that decommissioning process, especially Fiddler's Ferry, and it's been halted at the moment because of COVID. So there's this kind of, there'll be now this period of stalemate in terms of what happens with that area. It is up for development for an industrial park of some description. You know, so it's who's to say that that is potentially any kind of visually better, or
it's tricky, isn't it? Because I think I am quite a nostalgic person, but I'm very forward thinking as well. And, you know, I have to be a bit pragmatic about, sometimes these buildings aren't going to survive, even though they're very beautiful. And you have to go, look, it's just part and parcel of change. and life, and you just have to let it go. No matter how hard that is, because you can't keep everything. I mean, if you just think about how things are, the layers of things and history underneath, that you find underneath what's underneath that and underneath that. You know, I've got a 1930s house, and when I took the lino up, there was a parquet floor, and I thought, I'll restore the parquet floor, but underneath the parquet floor was the original 1930s tiles. So you're like, where do you stop? You know, preserving, you know, what's there. I mean, I do think we should appreciate what we've got, but how far you can turn something like a power station and repurpose a power station. Obviously, they could do that here with Magna at the steelworks, but I just don't know how practical some of those things are, and in terms of maintenance for some of those things as well, much as I would like to keep them.
True. There's a question from Michael. He says, I'm interested in the pylon as type and the ways in which they relate to the varying landscape conditions that they move through. And he wonders if that sort of idea gave structure to either prose in Helen's case or image in Kevin's case in any particular way.
It didn't in terms of shape, just purely imagery for me. And I was also conscious that I've written about pylons before, so I couldn't repeat any of the things that I'd already written, and I'd got to come up with some new things about what I observed this time and experienced the pylon differently this time. So I don't tend to use structure and form in that way in my poetry anyway.
Yeah, I think again, a lot of how I approach it was more informed by how Helen had seen it in the past, and those little kind of observations and those bits of text that I'd kind of read and the conversations that obviously we had were what informed my decisions as to how to take them. And then it was only really Helen again highlighting observations that she'd made from the images that made me think about that more. And that was then an instigating factor to then me kind of exploring that in more detail and trying to kind of make more, bring that to more of a prominence within the image itself. Depends on what people see, doesn't it, I suppose?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. With that in mind, then, one final question that we're trying to really tease out through this project. I'd like to know what values do you place on the objects and the landscapes of infrastructure?
They're you know, aside from their practical purpose, they are just things of considerable beauty for me, and the value of that alone is enough. I think that we know how much thinking went behind into the design of those pylons, that it's not just, you know, it's practical. You know, there was the aesthetics and the design principle for me is yeah, that is so valuable.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, and like I said earlier, I think for me, you know, in the past I've kind of exploited these as kind of features within a landscape, a way of breaking up the landscape, a way of accentuating a sense of depth and scale, and you know, they work as focal points that you know, are there to be appreciated in any, you know, in comparison to any other focal point that you would consider, like a tree or a house or whatever. And but it just so happens that, you know, they have other significance in terms of the relevance and in terms of what they offer to people. And you know, which makes those structures more interesting as far as I'm concerned. You know, there's a history to them, there's an extended use, there's you know, there's other things that are connected to them, and so for me there's huge significance in their place within the landscape, and so yeah.
Great, thank you very much, guys. I'd like then just to pass back over to Luca to close proceedings. Is that okay, Luca?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for both of you. I really enjoyed hearing many things that I've been thinking about a lot in a completely different context, you know, coming from a practical landscape architect background, very much interested in history and art history. You know, I approach these things with a different lens, but I just love hearing other people appreciating similar things from completely different backgrounds. And I really love the way how the two of you communicated to each other and came up with something that I think we were only hoping that is you know, going to come up. So would like to just thank you to both of you for taking part in the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's just been brilliant. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been really enjoyable. Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, and thank you for everyone coming out tonight as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate that.
Lovely. I can see the comments. It's been really nice to kind of just have a glance. So it's really good. Yes,
I would also like to thank everyone for coming and join us on Tuesday for our final talk between Jen Ortpin and Gareth Fries. Same time, nearly the same place, I guess. It's also Zoom. So yes, looking forward to seeing you all next week again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.